some big shots. I think everybody on the floor did a good job of hitting big shots. And then on the other end, we got some stops. Our D was good tonight, so we got to make sure our D stay good.
Before the game, Kent Bazemore told me it's too far into the season to allow 2 losses back-to-back. If you agree with that, how important is that win?
Oh, it's very important, but it starts with the D. So we got to make sure we keep playing defense.
Welcome back to Ball Don't Lie here on Penn State Sports Night. Our second show of this semester is obviously me, Hunter Pitcoff, here at Matt Szczypiorski. A bit of a rivalry day here. The Lakers and the Sixers are playing each other, both leading the top of their conferences. So at the very least, Matt, at least we're happy where our teams currently are.
Yeah, definitely. It's encouraging to see the Sixers actually playing up to their potential. I guess tonight will be their first true test. They played Boston last week, but they were without Tatum. So Lakers defending champs. To be the champs, you got to beat the champs.
Yep. So there might be a lot of trash talking going on between us two behind the scenes. So we'll see how that one goes. But speaking of Philadelphia and Los Angeles, very own Kobe Bryant, of course. This was the 1-year anniversary since him, Gianna Bryant, and 7 others were unfortunately killed in that horrific helicopter crash on January 26th. We saw a bunch of things on social media and things like that. Matt, what was your whole take on it and things of that nature?
Well, it was just a year ago. It was a true where were you when moment. I remember being in my apartment. I was just like doing homework and stuff. And my one Freddie said, Kobe Bryant just died. And I was like, shut up, man. Like, that's like wherever you got that from, that's false. Like, there's no way. He's 41 years old. There's no way. And, now a year later with everything that's happened since then, obviously, we're not missing Kobe, the basketball player right now. I think that's obvious. We're missing Kobe, the human being. My heart really feels for their family right now. And we're really missing Kobe, the human being, in terms of what he did for the community outside of basketball. And then, of course, what he did for basketball. He was a big proponent in the WNBA because he had 4 daughters, and his daughter Gianna, who was also unfortunately lost in that helicopter crash, was probably the best basketball player that he had in his family. He said that multiple times. He was very proud of her, as he was proud of all of his daughters. And it's just an unfortunate situation to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun fact, that's actually the day we met, Matt, was on Kobe Bryant's death. It was prep session that day.
Yeah.
And since today is the 27th, this was the first show of the spring semester last year. So, yeah, who would have known that probably one of the worst days of my life was when I meet my future podcast compadre here. So I guess good things happen, in the eye of the storm. But anyways, though, some news about the All-Star game. It was looking like the NBA was not planning to have an All-Star game, but that may change a little bit here. Apparently, there are some plans potentially, could be in Atlanta, projected to be in March, not the typical February date like it normally is. But I don't know, Matt, given everything going on, do you think there should be an All-Star game, or you think that maybe you should keep it on pause this year?
No, Hunter, I don't think so. This seems like an event that COVID's going to dominate. In the grand scheme of things, holding this event is just so not worth it right now, especially when you have such little time to put it together too. I would say use this week that they have penciled in right now. Use that week to give these players some much needed rest. Yeah,
obviously the big thing with All-Star game and the festivities is traveling and bringing people all to a city. So it's not always New York that has it or LA. Like there's, Indianapolis was supposed to have it, and that's a smaller market team, being the Indiana Pacers. That was going to be a big deal for them, but obviously they're not going to be hosting it, even if there is one this year. So I do tend to agree with you, Matt. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but at the same time, though, like, is it worth it given these circumstances? No. And also you're going to ask players to be away from their families even more so than they already are. I'm not sure. There might be players that if they happen to have an All-Star game that they may not even want to go. So, I think that's all to be considered. And like we said, Matt, obviously, basketball isn't needed right now. But at the very least, these guys obviously, want to work and have jobs. And the All-Star game doesn't really make much difference otherwise.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's a good point you bring up about players possibly opting out of the NBA All-Star game. It's not something I hadn't thought of, but it's definitely possible. I could totally see a bunch of players doing that, especially since, like you said, like it's probably the first time all season that they would have a week with their families.
Yeah. But so I do encourage an All-Star break per se, because at the end of the day, there always should be something like that. But yeah, perhaps maybe keeping the All-Star game on hold will be for the better. Obviously, we're seeing the Pro Bowl is not even going to be a thing this year. It's going to be like some Madden thing. So I think they were better off just not doing that at all. I hope the NBA doesn't do something stupid like that. But something interesting, speaking about, a guy like LeBron who would potentially sit out of this, he was not very happy when they played the Cleveland Cavaliers Monday night. He had 46 points. The dude was hooping 21 points in the fourth quarter. But a Cavs exec, Jason Hillman, was caught cheering pretty excessively, clapping his hands like this all together on the sideline after LeBron missed a shot. He wasn't very happy about it. He made some comments like that seemed like he was a little too excited about that. What's your thoughts on this, Matt? Do you think the Cavs are still a little bit salty that LeBron left?
Well, after seeing the clip, it was definitely really excessive. He pretty much got right in his face as close as he could get from the sideline. And of all the players to, talk like that to, LeBron, the guy that gave you 11 great seasons in your organization, made your organization relevant, brought a title to your city for the first time in 60 years. I think that's I think Jason Hillman's barking up the wrong tree there, especially since he, motivated LeBron to go for 21 in the fourth and give the Lakers the win.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard this Jay-Z line, Matt, but it said, don't bark up the tree will fall on you. And that's basically what happened against the Lakers. LeBron, it was a close game, but the Lakers were able to separate, LeBron obviously being probably the biggest reason why. And yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen the Cleveland tourism video, Matt. It looks like you haven't, but there's like this funny line. It's basically just like this guy from Cleveland, like making fun of like Cleveland and like all of its like woes, I guess. And he said this one line, like, our economy is based on LeBron James. Like,
it's true though. It's
yeah,
so
it kind of was. I mean, I don't know the statistics, but I'm sure he brought a lot of revenue in for a city that guy in that song said has, quote, crippling depression. So, but anyways, I'm not gonna, get on Cleveland too much here. No disrespect. But in more enlightening news, I guess, Karis LeVert, we talked about how due to him being traded, he had to get a physical done in order to be traded, and they found a mass on his kidney. He underwent surgery to treat what happened to be called kidney cancer, and he's expected to make a full recovery. Obviously, we'd love to see him on the court again because he's an extremely talented player. But even outside of that, I just hope for his own well-being, he's healthy and, he can at least get, into full health before he can even start talking about basketball again.
Yeah, we talked about this last week, Hunter, where it was just a true blessing in disguise that he got traded. If he's able to come back at all this season, which it's up in the air whether that happens or not, that will be a great story regardless of how he actually plays for the Pacers. And this is just another instance of everything happens for a reason, man. Life knows what it's doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy that, all of that happened. But again, like you said, Matt, things just sometimes line up a certain way. But let's talk about some trade talk here. I think it's safe to say that Kelly Oubre has been booty on the Golden State Warriors this year. He is shooting 35% from the field, 21% from the three-point line, 74% from the free throw line, averaging 11.6 points per game. There's been trade talks that he might potentially get traded to the New Orleans Pelicans. I'm not really sure about that fit. I felt like the Warriors was a bit of a desperation move when Klay Thompson got hurt to get Kelly Oubre. I didn't love the fit with the Warriors in the first place, and I've been proven right, at least to that point. Matt, what's your thoughts? Should the Warriors try to move Kelly Oubre, and do you think that the Pelicans should be the right destination for him?
I don't know if there's a lot of places in the league that would take on Kelly Oubre right now. He's not playing good basketball, even after having a career last year in Phoenix. I agree with you there. I think New Orleans is a questionable fit. Golden State was also a questionable fit. I think we both thought that going into that trade. For the Warriors right now, I mean, it's like, what kind of value would you get back for Oubre? Not much, but he's also not giving you much value on the court either. So it's a tough situation. I think they'll probably move on from him.
Yeah, I think at this point you might as well just try to make it work because I think, Kelly Oubre's not a bad player. And I think at this point he's at his lowest market value. So I feel like what you're going to get in return, you're basically just being like, we're getting rid of him for the sake of getting rid of him. Maybe that's worth it. I'm not sure. But if I was them, I'd maybe just try to get a little more creative with how you use him on the court. But speaking of the Pelicans, they are looking to move off Lonzo Ball and JJ Redick. I'm not going to lie, Matt, when we were on our segment on Monday, be sure to check that out. We talked some NBA first impressions there. My bold prediction was that Lonzo Ball was going to get traded. And then sure enough, right after that, all the rumors started flying. I actually did not know. I didn't have any inside ear to the New Orleans organization. I kind of just guessed based on basketball knowledge, I guess. And it looks like Lonzo might be finding a new landing spot. So is JJ Redick. I want to ask you, Matt, what do you think their market is? And do you have any potential landing spots for these guys?
Well, JJ Redick is always going to have some value just because he can shoot the three, and three-point shooting is obviously a welcomed addition to any team. He's a turnstile defensively, but he's been like that for years. You know what you're getting out of him. He's on a relatively cheap deal, so he could go pretty much anywhere that needs three-point shooting. And then Lonzo Ball, this is an interesting one because quite the opposite of JJ Redick. He can't shoot the three, but he plays decent defense. And he's a good passer, we know this, but his shooting is just, as you said on Monday, Ben Simmons like right now. He just can't shoot. I think a team that's interesting, though, is the team that we brought up just a second ago in the Golden State Warriors. I think Ball would fit pretty well there with Golden State off the bench, kind of filling that Sean Livingston role, if you will. I think he's like the perfect guard to play with Steve Kerr. Or if they would want to, start Lonzo Ball, he would be a good complement as a pass-first guy looking for a shoot-first guy in Steph Curry.
Yeah, I actually think both those guys would be fairly good in Golden State if they did some like package deal. Maybe that's how it is. They package Redick and Lonzo for Kelly Oubre or something. I'm not sure. If I'm the Warriors, I would take that trade probably in a heartbeat. But I do like Lonzo's fit in Golden State from an offensive flowing, free-flowing, his ability to pass in the open court. He's one of the best in the NBA at that. Great rebounder as a guard, really good defender. So I think he can complement Steph Curry there. But the shooting numbers have been so bad. And if you did watch our segment, I highlighted them. He's shooting below 40% from the field, below, I believe, 30% from three, and below 60% from the foul line. That is really bad. Not only that, you are a point guard. You are supposed to be able to at least be a competent shooter, and you have
Ben Simmons
completely plateaued. And at least Ben Simmons doesn't shoot that many threes. Like Lonzo gets the threes, like he does shoot them. It's not like this is a high sample size here, and it's sad to see what's happened with Lonzo. I mean, I thought entering the league, we had Magic Johnson calling him, the next great point guard for the Lakers, saying his jersey was going to be in the rafters. I would like to think Lonzo wasn't overhyped because when you watched him at UCLA, he literally turned a crippling program into a powerhouse in a matter of a season. And as soon as he left, they were terrible and have been terrible since. So the guy was really, really good in college. He was a first-team All-American as a true freshman. So this wasn't like a bad player at all. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's off the court issues. I really don't know what it is, but he just doesn't seem fully engaged, didn't seem fully engaged in the bubble. And as a result, he's been pretty disappointing in New Orleans.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, he had such lofty expectations coming in. It was kind of, when Magic Johnson is saying you're going to have your jersey in the rafters, that's some tough expectations to live up to, especially when you're only with the Lakers for 2 years. But yeah, he has been pretty disappointing. His shot has been the most disappointing. He had that weird form coming in, and ever since he's changed it, kind of rectified it. The shooting has kind of gotten worse.
Yeah, I think, Lonzo Ball is just never going to be a great shooter. I think we just got to accept that at this point and look at him for what he is, which is a shame because it is a shooting league. It's hard to be a great player. You have to be great at basically everything else in order to be an effective player if you're not really a shooter. But yeah, some potential landing spots. I was here in the Bulls. I like that fit a lot with LaVine and Kobe White. I think he complements them really nicely because he plays defense and he's a good passer. Those guys are not that, but they're really good scorers and can play off the ball. The Knicks, I heard, was a potential interesting fit. They're looking for a nice young point guard there. Obviously, they got Emmanuel Quickley, who you really like, Matt, but they can use maybe another guy there as well. So maybe there are a couple of suitors for Lonzo, but I'm curious to see if the Pelicans will get what they want in return for the former number 2 pick.
Yeah, I mean, for a former number 2 pick, you're not going to get that much, especially for Lonzo Ball. Like we said, he's not shooting well. I'd be interested, though, if the Knicks were to trade for him, would they probably give up another guard or would they give up one of the 8 power forwards they have?
Yeah, maybe they give up one of those 8 power forwards because they got a lot of them. It's like the
Chicago does Taj Gibson have any trade value left?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a very good point. But let's talk about a player who does play the forward position, but is a really young, promising player, absolutely. And as Michael Porter Jr., he made his return for the Denver Nuggets. He missed 10 games due to COVID protocol. I don't believe he had COVID, but I believe he just kept, unfortunately, getting in contact with people. I don't know if that's coincidence. I don't know if he was being reckless. I'm not sure, but I'm not going to assume. But anyways, though, Last game had 30 points in the win over Dallas, including 18 in the second half. And that is a game with 2 MVP frontrunners in Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic. And he is entering the Nuggets. It seems at the perfect time because they've won 7 of their last 9 games, Matt, after a really rough start to this season. I respect Michael Porter Jr. He's not currently starting, but he's okay with it. He said he did not want to disrupt the team's chemistry. And then, like we said, Nikola Jokic averaging 25 points, 9 assists, and 12 rebounds per game, almost a triple-double at the center position, Matt. How much better can Michael Porter make this Nuggets team?
Well, there's no question he makes them better, and I think it's not a coincidence that once he came back, they're starting to hit their stride now. I think he's like we said before. We've said this before in this podcast. We've said this a lot of times. Actually, we're a Michael Porter Jr. podcast. We've proclaimed that already. But he just fits that team really well. He fits they had a need at the forward position. He fits in there right really well. He can shoot the ball really well. He shoots a 3 at a pretty good rate. And he's getting better on defense. He's not great. We both know that. But offensively, there's no question about his talent.
Yeah, and I think he could potentially get better at defense. I mean, he's 6'10" and super athletic. So if he's able to get that done, I mean, from an offensive standpoint, he's a monster. He was, I believe, the number 1 ranked player coming out of high school, had some injury issues at Missouri and when he came into the NBA. But Denver rolled the dice on him, and I think they will pay off on that investment. But let's talk about a wing who is already an established guy, but he also came back after missing 5 games due to COVID protocol, and that is Jason Tatum. Scored 24 points in the win over the Chicago Bulls. They were 2-3 without him, so they were not great. Peyton Pritchard, too, is expected to miss 2 weeks after suffering a grade 1 MCL sprain in his right knee. And that injury looked way worse in live time than it actually was. So thank God. Pritchard literally said, I'm done. This is it. He thought he was over, but good thing for him, he wasn't. But let's talk about the Boston Celtics a little bit here. Jason Tatum coming back is big. They've had a bunch of injuries, but do you think that they'll able to eventually, have a nice cohesive unit and be a real threat in the East?
Well, obviously, this team is infinitely better with Jason Tatum in the lineup. Nobody's going to debate that. Jaylen Brown's been really coming into his own in Tatum's absence, and even with Tatum, he's been playing really well. Kemba Walker is starting to get his legs back under him. And then Peyton Pritchard, his injury is interesting because it seemed like he was starting to play more and was getting Jeff Teague's minutes off the bench once Kemba came back. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects him going forward after his injury when he comes back.
Yeah, I remember we were very on the fence either side about Peyton Pritchard. I was a big Peyton Pritchard fan.
Mm-hmm.
You were not so much, and he's looked pretty good so far. I mean, the injury is unfortunate, but I like me some Peyton Pritchard. What can I say? And I like the fit with the Boston Celtics. But let's talk about another former Celtic here. Gordon Hayward hit a game winner against the Magic in a 39-point effort. He's averaging 24 points. A little over 3 assists and 5 rebounds per game, shooting 51% from the field, 43% from the 3-point line. And that is in the most amount of attempts per game, too. So this is a big sample size, 86% from the foul line. I want to ask you, Matt, do you think he is maybe one of the most underrated players in the NBA right now?
Well, I mean, you certainly could make an argument for that, but I think his star is a little bit too big to be considered underrated, maybe. But I could also make an argument for Tobias Harris. His contract is obviously really overinflated. He's overpaid for sure, but he's really coming to his own this year with Doc Rivers. And then the same goes for Julius Randle, too. Julius Randle has been playing at an MVP level for a Knicks team that, quite honestly, is not good around him, but he's made them look a lot better. He's won them some games. I can see he's underrated, but I will say that Hayward certainly also deserves to be an all-star this season as he's shooting at a ridiculous clip, as we mentioned, while shooting a lot on a mediocre young team. He's been that veteran leadership. He's been the star of that team so far. So I think he deserves to be an all-star.
Yeah, and look, like you said, Matt, the Hornets are not a great team. I get that, but I mean, they're a small market. This isn't a team that, is going to get, big time guys very often. So sometimes you just got to overpay for them. So far it's looked like they've hit on the Gordon Hayward contract. I know $30 million may be a tad bit much, but based on the numbers he's putting up, and if he keeps this up, I mean, that's actually not a terrible contract, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's no Al Horford contract, that's for sure.
No.
Right now, it's hard to deny his value with the way he's playing. And as you said, it's a small market team. They're not going to get opportunities at guys like this very often, and they will have to overpay for him sometimes. And that's fine, because look, the Hornets had more than enough money to spend, and he makes them a lot better than they would be without him. So I'll say he was definitely worth the contract.
Yeah, I actually think I wasn't super against it at the time when they signed it. My opinion, if anything, I thought he was just a nice little asset they had. But I think, he's not going to be the best player on a playoff team. But if the Hornets are able, get maybe LaMelo Ball becomes something really good. Maybe they get another draft pick in this stacked 2021 draft class, and then they really build something. I think that I think this contract will eventually pay off. I kind of like where the Hornets are going, and I've never really said that before, so I respect it. So also too, a little bit of an injury update here. Domantas Sabonis, no structural damage found in his knee. MRI came back clean, but he's considered day to day. Wendell Carter Jr. for the Chicago Bulls out for at least 4 weeks due to a severe right quad contusion. I don't know, Matt. Do you have any 2 cents on that? Just giving a little bit of an injury report here.
Well, it's good that Domantas Sabonis, his MRI came back clean, because that team would be dead in the water without him. He is what makes that offense go. So it's good to see that he is going to be back soon. And Wendell Carter Jr., I mean, the Bulls are already trash as it is. Like, it's not going to make any difference.
Yeah, I feel bad for Wendell. I feel like it's just never fully clicked for him. He's got talent, but yeah, it just seems like things just keep holding him back there. But anyways, though, Matt, we have a slogan on this podcast. You know what it is. Give the people what they want.
No team left behind, baby.
Yes, sir. And now we're going to move on to our players of the week. My list isn't as obscure as it normally is, Matt, but I still had to do some digging. You know what it is, but I'll let you go first here.
Yeah, so my players, they're all a theme. They're all centers. And the 2 are pretty obvious. I'm going to start with Joel Embiid. Averaged 37 points per game this week while shooting 61% from the field, and was 3-0 in every game that he played. He dominated the Celtics and had Tristan Thompson calling him daddy in the post. He was also the main reason the Sixers were able to come back and beat the Pistons on Saturday night. People have started calling him MVP'd. It's me. I'm people. But he's got a big test tonight against AD and the Lakers.
Yeah, maybe you want to get that print on a shirt, Matt, before other people start doing it. Make a profit off, Joel Embiid's likeness. But maybe you have to make a song about him too that'll go viral on TikTok, like our boy Matt Scratch. Shout out Matt. But yeah, Joel Embiid has been phenomenal. I feel like he's finally not that he wasn't living up to potential. He's probably one of the best centers in basketball, but I feel like we're really starting to see like him just dominating every single game with that mentality. And I respect it a lot because he's got the skill to do it,
Yeah, he's really taken everything more serious. There were times 3 years ago where he was eating Chick-fil-A sandwiches before playoff games, and he was sick and he couldn't play well and all this crap. But now he is taking his health really seriously, and he's taking his game really seriously. He's really elevated his game even farther than I thought he ever would.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you Sixer fans, hopefully he can, continue to bring that, that elevated play into the postseason, because that's what they're going to have to need from him in order to make a run at the championship. But a guy who I have on my list, David Green, our former podcast member, says I have a basketball crush on him, and he's probably right. That's going to be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Hey, I like guards who are 6'6", with 7-foot wingspan, who could dribble past and shoot, plays defense, has a high basketball IQ, okay? I have a type. But anyways, though, over the past 7 days, he's averaging over 25 points per game, 7 assists, 6 rebounds, an 8.2 assist to turnover ratio, Matt. That's ridiculous. So that means that he's been very effective and he's not turning the ball over. I get that the Thunder aren't great, but they've been better than anticipated. I think they play really hard, and some of these young guys have really clicked for them.
Yeah, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been very good since he came into the league with LA. The Thunder's got really lucky with getting him back in that deal for Paul George. And as the Thunder is the team right now, they kind of don't know they're supposed to be bad. They're winning a bit too much, probably for Sam Presti's liking. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has certainly been a star on that team.
Yeah, they're 7-9, which isn't great. They're not going to make the playoffs. I'm sure they'll fall off eventually. But that's pretty good for that team. And you're I think we're
that's 7 more wins than they're supposed to have. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. We thought they were going to be the single worst team in the NBA. They were trying to be, but perhaps not. But I guess that's what happens when you trade, some big time players and get a lot in return. You're not, that's just kind of how the name of the game works. But Matt, who else made your list here?
Well, sticking with my center theme, MVP candidates, I'm going to go Nikola Jokic. We mentioned him earlier a little bit, and he really goes hand in hand with Embiid at this point. It feels as though you can't mention one without the other. Jokic has been the Nuggets' offense to start the season, and that was no different this week as he averaged 29 points per game, nearly 15 boards, and over 6.5 assists. It's clear he and Embiid are jockeying between 1 and 2 for that early season MVP.
Yeah, both of them have been absolutely phenomenal. And like we said, the Nuggets, they had a slow start, but really starting to pick it up. Getting Michael Porter Jr. back to big plus. And maybe some of those other complementary pieces will eventually step up so that Jokic doesn't have to literally just carry the team on his back.
Yeah, definitely. And if they can start getting any value from him defensively, that'd be great too.
Yep. And next on my list is going to be a little bit of an interesting name, but I'm going to go with Eric Gordon for the Houston Rockets. Rockets are currently on a 3-game win streak. Ironically, after James Harden got traded, he's averaging 24 points per game on a combined. He's hit 9 threes in his last 3 games, and he also has 25 free throw attempts in his last 3 games. So he's getting it done in a bunch of different ways. And Eric Gordon, I think he still does have game left. He's like, I believe, like 32 years old or something. So, this is about like as good as we're going to see him possibly play. A former 6th man of the year. I think that him playing this well is great for the Rockets because that means they can trade him and potentially get something else in return. And for Eric Gordon's sake, go to another playoff team.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best case scenario for both sides there. Eric Gordon, he struggled a little bit last year in the bubble and the playoffs too. But it's good to see that he's starting to get his shot back a little bit. As you said, he is 32 years old. He's getting up there in age, but he could possibly provide some bench value for some kind of contending teams down the stretch in the playoff time.
Yeah, don't be shocked if, the Rockets are wheeling and dealing him at the trade deadline. Apparently, I'm good at guessing these things. I don't know. But, Matt, we know you have another center on your list here. Who is it?
This might be a little bit of a shocking name, but I'm going to go with Clint Capella. 21 points per game and 20 rebounds per game this week, Hunter. That is an absurd stat line. He came up huge in their OT win against Detroit last week as he put up 27 points and 26 rebounds. Then you look at his next game against Minnesota. This was just absurd. He got a triple-double with blocks as he dominated the paint in that game. Obviously, the Wolves were without Cat in that game, but to have 10 blocks in a game is ridiculous. He seems to be fitting in quite nicely down there in Atlanta, who has a winning record, by the way.
Yeah, the Atlanta Hawks, I remember saying how I think they had the most overrated offseason, and I'm still standing by it. But other guys that were already on the roster have actually played pretty well. That being Clint Capella, he really struggled when they first got there, and I can't say I really blame him because it was a brand new team in the middle of the season, didn't really get his feet wet with the Hawks early on. But like you said, Matt, I've kept an eye on him too. He's playing really, really well, and the Hawks are winning games as a result. So, Clint Capella has definitely proven his worth there in Atlanta.
Yeah, let's see who the last guy on your list is here, Hunter. I'm
actually another Atlanta Hawk. And
okay.
It's DeAndre Hunter.
Okay.
Yeah, averaging 22 points per game and 2 steals per game over the last couple, shooting 54% from the field, 92.9% from the foul line. That's in a lot of attempts too. I think he's only missed 1 free throw in his last 3 games. And I think he had at least like 6 or 7 attempts in each game. And he also had 33 points, which if that's not his career high, it's pretty close to it against the Milwaukee Bucks. He's been kind of looked over a bit. Obviously, we talk about Trae Young, we talk about John Collins. It seems like Clint Capella is kind of getting on notice too. And all the offseason acquisitions they made have done absolutely squat for them. But DeAndre Hunter, a guy who they traded up for in the draft in his rookie season, he has played really well. Obviously, I didn't mention the numbers. I obviously his 2 steals, but he's a great on-ball defender as well. And the Hawks are definitely going to need him to keep developing in order to make a playoff push.
Yeah, Hunter, is he still coming off the bench down there in Atlanta?
He starts.
Oh, he does start. All right, even
Yep.
better. So that's good. I think that's good because that's great for his progression. And as you said, he's a good on-ball defender already. Just continue to get this man some more time offensively. Obviously, 33 points against a great team in the Bucks is pretty good. And 2 steals is pretty good. Nothing to shy away from either. So I'm interested to see how he develops too. The former Virginia Cavalier.
Exactly. And I think he's averaging about 17 points on the season. So this isn't like he's just having a great couple games. Like, he's had a very, very solid season in general for Atlanta. And a team that really struggles on defense, he's probably their go-to perimeter guy on that. So they're definitely going to need him to stay healthy and to keep doing his thing. But similar to DeAndre Hunter, we are going to transition into some breakout players this season, some guys who have really stepped it up. And then we're going to debate if we are sold on their hot starts, if they can keep it up. The first guy on our list, and it goes without saying, it has to be Jaylen Brown, Matt. We talked about how Jason Tatum has missed some games. Jaylen Brown has stepped up. His 27.3 points per game is 6th in the entire NBA. He is top 10 in his player efficiency rating. I mean, based on how he's played, Matt, should he be considered like in the MVP race right now?
I don't know if I'd put him in the MVP race. I think I would need to see those stats more consistently and throughout the whole season. Also, he's just being overshadowed by other great players having great years, such as Embiid and Jokic right now. I think he'd certainly be in the top 10 conversation for MVP, but I don't know if he would, overtake guys like LeBron and Giannis and, guys like that.
Yeah, maybe he's not as big of a name, but I don't know. Maybe I'm not gonna sit here and say I think he's gonna win. But maybe gets like a 4th or 5th place vote if things just kind of keep happening the way they have been for the Celtics. They have really had a lot of transition without their roster. But Jaylen Brown's been the one constant. They're winning games as a result, and he's been the best player on the Celtics this season. Which a lot of people are starting to debate that is he actually a better player than Jason Tatum? What's your take on that, Matt?
No, but it's a lot closer than people may think, though. Brown has just continued to progress, arguably past his potential even. When Tatum was out the last 2 weeks, he tried his hardest to keep this team above water and was putting up some absurd numbers while shooting extremely efficiently, which is good. When you're putting up those big numbers, sometimes you have to check the box for a little bit and be like, are they, being efficient? Or are they just taking, James Harden 35 shots a game? But he's been really efficient and couple that with his solid defense, and you've got an all-star in your hands.
Yeah, I mean, I said on this podcast, Matt, I said Jaylen Brown is going to be an all-star this season. I felt so confident in that. And I think, he's played really well, and I think it's deserving of an all-star nod, potentially a starting nod, depending on how you look at it. But I agree with you. I think Tatum is still the guy there. But I've always said that they're kind of like the younger version of Kawhi and Paul George with the Clippers, just two really good wings that can get it done on both ends of the floor and extremely talented. We know that Kawhi is the best player. But Paul George is a very good second best player. I think that's what the Celtics have with these two guys.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And in terms, in terms of Brown being like where he ranks among the league's best, I put him top 20 right now for sure, which is what makes Boston such a scary team. As you said, they have 2 homegrown talents who are top 20 players right now in the NBA. That doesn't happen very often, especially now when free agency and trading is such a huge part of today's game. Come playoff time, I think their chemistry and unprecedented playoff experience. You look at LeBron, and they took that LeBron Cavs team to 7 games Tatum's rookie year. I think their chemistry and playoff experience are going to show.
Yeah, these are 2 young guys, but both have played in the playoffs every single season of their career and have played well in the playoffs, and I expect that to continue this season. I'm totally on board with you there, Matt. And I would say right now Jaylen Brown is playing at a top 20 level, but we'll see if it keeps up because he's still a young player and we'll see. But let's talk about another guy who has been absolutely really good this year, and that's going to be Collin Sexton of the Cleveland Cavaliers. I have been on record saying I don't think he's that good. He has proven me at least somewhat wrong this year. Statistically, he's 15th in the NBA in scoring at 24.8 points per game. Really good shooting numbers as well, and I think that's the big thing here because Collin Sexton's never been an efficient shooter, shooting 50.5% from the field, 46% from 3. We'll see if that keeps up, and 81% from the foul line. So Cavs are off to a nice start. I got to give Young Bull credit. He's the biggest reason why, of course, he's been the best player on that team. Is this a year that he makes an all-star team?
I think he could end up being one of the guys that ends up getting snubbed as an all-star and people throwing their hands up and going to social media about it in March. But he's played so well. I just don't think anyone takes this team seriously right now. Even though they've had success. And I think that'll end up hurting his case in terms of notoriety around the league, in terms of, all-star selection and stuff like that.
Yeah. And let's not forget that the Nets are probably going to have 3 guys in there this year. And Kyrie, Harden, and KD, all 3 who weren't in the all-star game last year. And then you have your typical guys like an Embiid, a Simmons. We're talking about Jaylen Brown's probably going to be an all-star. Jason Tatum, Giannis, Chris Middleton's still there. Like, there's other guys. Sabonis has had a great year.
Sabonis, yep.
Bam Adebayo's had a great year.
Bradley Beal.
Butler's healthy. Bradley Beal's another guy who's been on a bad team that gets snubbed. Trae Young. There's a lot of guys there that I would maybe take over Collin Sexton. But he, if the Cavs are in the playoff hunt come all-star decisions, I think you probably got to at least consider putting him in because I am someone, if I was an all-star voter, I vote on winning. If you are winning games, that to me provides more value. And if the Cavs are, staying afloat, I think that Collin Sexton would deserve to be in there.
Yeah, I think it's just going to come down to a numbers game at a certain point because they only take 24, 26 all-stars, something like that, right?
Yeah, it's 24-12 each conference.
Yeah. So I just think it's going to be a numbers game at a certain point. I think there's just too many guys that are that are having great seasons as well, especially in the Eastern Conference with point guards.
Yeah, and where do you think Colin Sexton ranks among some of these top point guards in the league? You see he's like top 10, top 15, top 20?
Early in the season, I saw a ranking where he was 28th in the league, and that's definitely not the case anymore. I'll put him around the top 10, but he's right on the fringe, probably in that 9 to 13 range for me. There's just so many great point guards in the league right now, but I'll definitely put him above Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, Russell Westbrook has not been great this season. Let's just say that. I believe it was something like you said this to me, Matt. He was shooting, has 163 points on 163 shots. That is not very efficient. Maybe he'll turn it around. We'll see. New team. But you don't believe so. Poor Bradley Beal. He's like averaging 35 and they still suck. Poor guy. Get this man on a different team, for crying out loud. But yeah, I think with Colin Sexton, it's hard for me to tell. Like, I would take Trae Young over him. I'd take John Moran over him. Like, De'Aaron Fox, that one's a little debatable. Maybe De'Aaron Fox is pretty good too.
I'd still probably take De'Aaron Fox.
Yeah, like Kemba Walker, it's hard. There's a lot of really good point guards in the league, but I don't want to discredit Young Bull either, because he has had a great season, and for him, he's not really much of a passer either, which doesn't help. Is an okay defender, although he does make some good defensive plays out there. So let's talk about a guy who, at least Colin Sexton was maybe a little predictable he'd have a good year. Let's talk about a guy who's like, how the hell has this happened? He's like the Marcus Morris of the NBA this year, and that's Jeremy Grant. Yes, his numbers are inflated. I get that, but he is 7th in the NBA minutes per game, and he's averaging 24.3 points per game. And to put that in perspective, Matt, he averages 9.8 points per game throughout his career, and he's been in the league for quite some time. So this is like a random season that just came out of freaking nowhere, averaging more than double the attempts from last season from the field. What do you think about his season, Matt? I know he's a former process guy, so he hits home for you.
Yeah, well, the 9.8 points per game, let's not completely, give that all on him, because he did play for the process Sixers for a while there, so it's hard to score on that team with all that talent there. So, I think he's definitely deserving of any notoriety he gets this season. That jump from 9.8 to 24.3 points per game is absurd. He is, the only reason the Pistons have the 4 wins that they do right now. That Pistons team is really, really bad. Blake Griffin has not played well this year. Derrick Rose is a shell of himself. So Jeremy Grant has been kind of a breath of fresh air for that team. And I think, his trade stock is starting to go up a little bit here.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the debate here. The Sixers, the Pistons try to trade Jeremy Grant here because, it's like fish grease right now. I can't imagine his stock getting any hotter than it currently is. So if you were the Pistons, Matt, do you move off of Jeremy Grant, or do you just ride this out?
Well, I could definitely see him getting moved to the deadline. I think kind of like a Tobias Harris type situation where he gets so hot on a team that's like really not trying to have good players right now. I think that they're probably going to end up moving on from him. If he goes to a contender, there's no way he'll be able to keep his stats up though. But we saw how good he was last year in Denver, how he fit with that team. He plays great defense, and he can clearly shoot. So it would be a great addition to any team.
Yeah, I was surprised the Nuggets kind of let him go. Apparently, they tried matching the offer that the Pistons gave him, and he said no. So maybe this was in the plans all along for Jeremy Grant. He knew he was a franchise player. But yeah, like you said, Matt, Blake Griffin has 0 dunks this year, which is ridiculous for a guy who was a former slam dunk champion. And he's only averaging 12 points per game. Really, really sad for him. But let's talk about a guy who was on the Pistons last year, is now absolutely hooping in Houston. That's Christian Wood. So this is his 6th NBA team in 6 seasons that he's been in the league. He went undrafted in 2015. His girlfriend dumped him on draft night after getting undrafted. I'm sure she's been calling him ever since, but he's probably not picking up the phone. Averaging 23.5 points per game. 10.8 rebounds, 1.8 blocks, shooting 52% from the field, 36% from 3. I don't know about you, Matt, but with James Harden gone there, I was telling some other people this and they weren't believing me. I think Christian Wood is the best player on Houston now.
Yeah, I think he's the best player for them just because I see him as the only guy on the team that's staying long term. But I wouldn't, it's tough because Oladipo's there now. He's a good player, but Christian Wood has really come into his own. I still think I would put Wood over Oladipo right now. Even John Wall has been playing really well, but I'd still put Christian Wood as probably the center of that team, probably the best player on that team right now. And honestly, I think he gets my most improved player vote over Jeremy Grant.
I completely agree with you, Matt. I think that's who I'd give it to right now. They only signed for 3 years, $41 million. And when you were watching him on the Pistons last year, I was surprised they didn't re-sign him because he looked really good. It was funny because in that 2015 draft coming out of UNLV, I had him as a first-round pick, and he went undrafted. I was like, is there like character issues or something there? Like, I'm not really sure. I've watched some of his interviews. It doesn't really seem like that was it. I don't know. Sometimes teams just kind of overlook guys. But Christian Wood has been really good this year. I remember watching him against the Lakers, watching full games, and I was like, oh, he's holding his own against Anthony Davis. Like, I got to give him credit. And that's obviously probably the best big man in basketball. So if you were the Rockets, is he untouchable? Do you even consider moving on from him?
Well, I don't see any reason to move on from him right now because he's so young. He's kind of a player that you could build around right now. And he is on a team-friendly deal, a cheap deal. But I wouldn't say untouchable, though, because no one is untouchable. Anyone is tradable with the right deal.
That's fair. But would you actively really take offers?
No, I wouldn't actively shop him right now. I wouldn't do that.
Okay. Yeah, I shouldn't have said untouchable. That's on me. But let's talk about a guy who's really untouchable. No, I'm just kidding. But Julius Randle for the New York Knicks. He is third in the NBA in minutes per game, averaging almost 37. So like you said, Matt, Tom Thibodeau loves overplaying his players and giving them those minutes. But he has lived up to the hype, averaging 22.7 points per game, 6.1 assists. I think that one's a little shocking, and 11.3 rebounds. He's shooting a career high from three and from the foul line. He looks like he is in the best shape of his career, and he better be because, like we said, he's going to get the burn from Tom. But what's his future in New York look like? Is this a guy that they can keep around and help build up this young core? Or do you think he gets shipped off too ultimately?
Well, Randall, he's really picked up his game from last season. He certainly has the potential to be an all-star this year. He'll, like Colin Sexton, be in that conversation, but we'll just see if he gets pushed out by some other big names. But in terms of his future in New York, I think that depends on what the Knicks' future is looking like. If I were him, I'd look to cash out with a big payday once his contract is up next offseason, I believe. And if the Knicks continue to miss the playoffs or don't get any big-name free agents, I think he could ultimately leave.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You talked about your process Sixers. He's from the Dark Age Lakers, Julius Randle. Mm-hmm. He is he's the first player that they drafted in 2014 that I consider the Lakers process, if you will. That was a good draft class. Him and Jordan Clarkson came out of that draft. It's pretty good for the Lakers. Shout out to
they don't play for them anymore.
Yeah, they don't play for him anymore. But they hit on a lot of those picks, and they just played better at other teams, I guess. But yeah, credit to Julius Randle. He's had a really good year. Obviously, my boy RJ Barrett has also had a very good year as well. So take that with a grain of salt, Matt. But yeah, the Knicks have played pretty hard, and I don't know. They are one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, and like we said, Matt, defense really does go a long way in the NBA, where it seems like no one does play defense. So perhaps they could be one of those teams that sneak into the playoffs. Who knows? Or maybe at least in the play-in tournament.
Yeah, first in the league in defense, there's no denying that. That's pretty good. But with Tom Thibodeau, it's pretty expected. Which I think their issue right now is just finding players that can consistently score other than Julius Randle. Last night it was Austin Rivers for some reason. I watched that game last night because my roommate's a Knicks fan, and he had 25 points in the first half. And we were looking at each other like, what is going on right now? He couldn't miss. Yeah, but I just think they need someone pretty consistent that's going to step up for them if they're going to make any run of the playoffs.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I remember Austin Rivers actually gave a quote maybe like a week or so ago. He said, I played for a lot of bad teams. He's like, this is not a bad team. Like, we are not bad. Like, we can really play. So I respect him having that mentality, and they play hard for the bare minimum. It gives the Knicks fans can actually watch like a product of basketball and be like, you know what, this is pretty solid.
Yeah.
So that's enough, in my opinion. Let's talk about some of the top teams in the league, because I wouldn't consider the New York Knicks that. We're going to talk about some of the top championship contending teams and talk about the Achilles heel for them. Like, what would go wrong for them if they didn't live up to their hype? What would be the reason why? Let's start with the Los Angeles Lakers, Matt. They are the defending championships. What would derail them from potentially going back to back?
Other than a key injury to LeBron or Anthony Davis or something like that, knock on wood, I think their main thing would be fatigue. having a championship run like the one they just had and such weird circumstances in the bubble and being away from their families and all that stuff. And then just 2 months before the season began also too. And I think that could end up hurting them down the stretch and come playoff time just because they've been playing basketball and competitive basketball for so long. But then again, it's LeBron, and this roster is head and shoulders above the rest. So who knows? Maybe talent does win out at the end.
Yeah, the Lakers are really deep this year, and I think that helps. In my notes here, I just wrote injuries. I think I think if the Lakers have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, they're gonna have a shot no matter what. They have about 11 guys that can really play. We've talked about the addition of Montrezl Harrell and Marc Gasol. We talked about Dennis Schroeder. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope with Alex Caruso, I believe, are top 3 in three-point percentage in the league, which is obviously really good, especially considering Alex Caruso wasn't considered a shooter, really.
The Caruso.
The Caruso. He does this every time he scores. Gotta love it. The bald Mamba, as people like to call him in Los Angeles. But they've been really good. Taylor Horton Tucker all of a sudden is like a player for them that I don't think they really thought would even happen. You can call me biased, but I think that's ultimately what's going to come down to for the Lakers. They have no excuse not to win it otherwise. Yeah,
I think they're definitely the team to beat this year. They're the team with a target on their back, certainly in the Western Conference, maybe in all of the NBA. And like you said, I think injuries would probably be the biggest concern. I think that kind of goes hand in hand with fatigue, because when you do start getting more fatigued, that's when injuries do tend to occur more often.
Yep, and let's talk about a team that probably is the biggest target on their back in the Eastern Conference, at least, and that's the Brooklyn Nets after they make that power move for James Harden. Well, so we know their issue won't be offense, I don't think, Matt. But let's tell a tale here why the Nets won't win the championship.
Well, this is exactly what I talked about on Monday night in our segment, why I thought they weren't going to make the Eastern Conference Finals even. It's their defense. We talked about it. This team can't play defense, man. They can put up points and score with unbelievable ease. There's no question about that, but it means nothing if you can't stop the other team from doing the same thing. So, if you want any advice on that, just ask the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns. Obviously, Mike D'Antoni's on the staff, so he's not preaching any defense either. So,
yeah, if it becomes like a firing range between two teams in the Brooklyn Nets, I will say they probably got a lot more bullets in the chamber with James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. All those guys, 2 of those guys are NBA champions. James Harden, at the very least, there won't be as much pressure on him to be, the guy in Houston. So perhaps maybe he's even more better in the playoffs. I don't know. Only time will tell. But yeah, I definitely agree with the defense. They might be one of the worst teams to ever win a championship defensively if they end up doing it, because they are really bad. I also said lack of depth is going to hurt this team, I think, too, potentially. I know they got the star power, and that is the most important thing. But, the Lakers, it was how deep they were. It was how deep the Denver Nuggets were, how deep the Miami Heat were. Like these teams performed well in the playoffs because they had a lot of guys who can step in and make timely plays when needed. I think the Nets, now it's possible you can kind of build up that bench unit and those role players a little bit, but I think there's still work to be done.
Yeah, I think they're going to be like the Lakers and Clippers were last year. They're going to be key players in the buyout market just because they have nothing left to trade. I think they'll probably end up trading for JaVale McGee or something like that. As a backup center, because right now they only have DeAndre Jordan as a center on the roster, which is not good. But I'm sure that won't be the case for long. I think depth is a good point to bring up, though, because right now they are really thin.
Yeah, and I think I heard something. I think Jeff Green typically plays backup center there, and he's not really one of those guys.
Yeah, it's not great.
They definitely have some work to be doing. There's not a whole lot of not a whole lot of supplies in the cabinet, if you will, for the Nets to go out and make a move. But let's talk about your Philadelphia 76ers, Matt. In your honest opinion here, why do you, if the Sixers weren't to win a championship or make a deep playoff run, why would it be?
This might be a surprise to you, but I'm going to say Ben Simmons. His shooting has become such an issue that it is starting to destroy this team's offense when he's on the floor and Embiid isn't. He's averaging career lows in points right now. Players continue to play him at the top of the key when he's crossing half court. And that takes away his ability to do what he does best, and that's drive to the hoop. The Sixers finally have everything they need to surround him. And Embiid playing at an MVP level, great shooters around him, a deep bench, a mix of young talent and veteran leadership, and Simmons is the only one not playing up to the potential offensively. But his defense is still awesome, though, I'll say that.
Yeah, I wrote down here, who outside of Embiid can I trust down the stretch? And who else can get their own shot if Embiid gets in foul trouble or he's getting double teamed? Because I think That was the big thing with Jimmy Butler when he was there. They had a guy who they knew they could put the ball in their hands with 2 minutes left in the game. Not that I don't think Embiid can be that guy, but I do think it's important to have a guy on the perimeter that can do the same thing. I don't know if I trust Ben Simmons down the stretch of games. He hasn't proven to be a clutch player yet, and if it's not him, who's it going to be, Matt? Because, then it has to be like a Tobias Harris or Shake Milton even. Like, I don't even know. I think that's why the Sixers were considering the James Harden deal and were willing to give up Ben Simmons potentially because, they were like, hey, James Harden offensively from a scoring perspective is more gifted than Ben Simmons.
Yeah, and that's certainly been the case this year with Ben Simmons struggling down the stretch. And they've even had to take him out of games a couple times because he's just been he's been such a liability offensively down the stretch, and because he's gotten a lot of foul trouble too. But I will say I trust this team's depth more than I did have in previous years if Ben Simmons is not on the floor and he's not producing. I like Tobias Harris this year. He's played really, really well. Seth Curry even has been awesome. And even, a guy like Shake Milton I would trust too. Shake Milton's been clutch before. He had a game winner in the bubble. Don't forget about that. So I think Ben Simmons if he's really the only issue I have right now with this team.
Yeah, and that's not great considering he's a max contract player, a multi-time all-star. Made All-NBA last season too. Let's not forget about that. And defensive player of the year candidate. He's going to have to be better on the offensive side of the ball. We don't want him to become a Rudy Gobert out here. Oh, man. Ouch. I mean, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. No. But let's talk about an Eastern Conference foe here in the Boston Celtics. We know about their talent offensively, but if they weren't to make a big run this year, why would they not?
I think their biggest Achilles heel right now, Hunter, and in the future is themselves. We've seen it every year. They've been in the playoffs with Brad Stevens. They've just seemed to fall apart the worst times. Even this past year against Miami in the bubble, they just got outplayed by a roster that wasn't nearly as good as theirs on paper. Miami just simply played harder than they did.
Yeah, I actually wrote something very similar in my notes, Matt. So I'm glad we're on the same page. I just said, are they tough enough physically and mentally? Is this team tough enough? Now, they're not a very big team, so that's why we're physically. Mentally, it just seems like you said, Matt, there's just games where you watch them where you think they should win and they just don't. They blew leads against Miami. They even blew some leads against Toronto too in the series. Wait, no, sorry. Am I getting that right? Yep, I am.
Yeah.
They played Toronto the series before that in the Eastern semifinals. But yeah, it's just they're a young team. I get it, but they're pretty experienced now. And if you're a Celtics fan, you want to see them get over the hump.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's time. They've just gotten to the almost to the top so many times. It's just time to get to the top now. That's the only thing. It's gotten to a point now for Celtics fans. It's what do you consider success this season? Is it championship or bust?
I think it's got to start being like that, Matt. Because that's the Celtics. They've won 17 championships. That's tied for the most in NBA history now. So that's it. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, I think they've both proven they are stars in this league. And they are both on their second contracts now. They're not rookies in the league anymore. They're young players, but now they're legit guys that and they do play well in the playoffs. But now they gotta go get the job done.
Yeah, certainly, and that's certainly the case. I think it's time for them to really start getting over that hump.
Yeah, we criticize Giannis, we criticize Embiid, we criticize all these other young players, and I think they gotta start getting that too. They gotta start getting that heat. But
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the Los Angeles Clippers. They were probably the most disappointing team in the NBA last season in terms of the results of everything. What do they need to do to potentially get over the hump this year?
Well, if they're going to struggle in the playoffs and if they're not going to win the championship this year, it's going to be because of players not named Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Well, I mean, maybe Paul George will crumble in the playoffs again, even though he's had a good year so far. But we'll see if we get Pandemic P again. But their bench has fallen off a bit with the loss of Montrezl Harrell, and Lou Williams hasn't been the same off the bench for them and has missed some time due to injury. Even Luke Kennard has not been what they thought he would be when they traded for him. I think right now the Lakers are just far deeper than this team and have much better chemistry even.
Yeah, everything you said, I totally agree with. But I think the biggest reason that they won't is because I think Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they need to play well every single game in the playoffs. We did not see that. There were games where one of them disappeared or both of them disappeared, and they were losing those games. Like what we saw with the Lakers, Anthony Davis and LeBron James played well every single game, and that's why they went all the way. Like the Clippers, if you're going to talk all that smack, you better bring it. And Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, like you said, Matt, maybe they're not as great off the bench. I agree with that. But your star players need to, bring it at the biggest moments. That's how it goes in the basketball. So if Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, it's on them. If they don't win a championship, it's mainly their fault.
And to that point, Hunter, you could even go back to the bubble last year when they blew that 3-1 lead against Denver. That game 7, Kawhi Leonard disappeared down the stretch. I think he only had 18 points in that game. You can't have 18 points in a game 7.
From the field.
Yeah, and he was terrible in the second half of that game, and Paul George was terrible throughout the postseason, and he blamed that on being in the bubble and stuff, which, whatever, that's your own thing. We won't talk about that. But, I agree with that point, 200. Like, if you're going to be the star players and you're going to get all that money, you got to show up in the postseason every single game.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it is. There's no more excuses here. I don't want to hear it. But let's talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that seems to be all out of excuses as well. What if they don't make the championship or anything like that? What will be the reason why?
Just continuing to find the worst times possible to not play at their best. Each of the last 2 years, they've been eliminated as the top seed because they just did not play like they did in the regular season when they were the best team in the Eastern Conference. In the playoffs, they got outmanned by Toronto after taking a 2-0 lead 2 years ago. And then last year in the bubble, they got destroyed by a Miami Heat team that was not nearly as good on paper. They were just so much better. They were Miami Heat, they played that dogs that series. They were so much better defensively. They destroyed Giannis. And here's the thing with Giannis. Here's my gripe with him. He was the defensive player of the year last year, right? But defensively, he never guards the team's best player. And we saw it last year in the bubble. He did not guard Jimmy Butler, even when Jimmy Butler was torturing them in the playoffs. He didn't guard them for whatever reason. And this season, I've seen a couple games where he's not guarded the team's best player. I forget what game it was. Oh man, it's really bugging me. I'm not gonna remember. But he is not taking the challenge of guarding the team's best player. And if you're gonna be the defensive player of the year, you got to guard the team's best player. You have to.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Michael Jordan being I'm going to guard Isaiah Thomas. We saw Michael Jordan being I'm guarding Clyde Drexler. Kobe Bryant, I'm guarding Russell Westbrook. I'm guarding Chris Paul, in playoff series.
It was Kevin Durant, that too. Yeah. Giannis wasn't guarding Kevin Durant in the MLK game they played on Monday night 2 weeks ago. That was bothering me so much. Why he wasn't guarding him.
I remember he was I'm guarding Jimmy Butler down the
stretch. Yes.
Final, right? They're not shying away from this. It seems like Giannis is. It's like you said, Matt, third contract now. You're the highest paid player, I believe, in the NBA now. No more excuses. You've won multiple MVPs, all NBA teams, all-stars, you name it. He's done everything. He's a very successful player. I'm not going to trash on him. I know he's good. But I think if the Bucks don't win it all this year, it's because Giannis didn't play like an MVP in the postseason. That's it. Unless everybody else around him is just that bad. Giannis, there's players who, elevate their game in the postseason. They are great in the regular season, but they're even better in the postseason. Those are the guys who talk about being the greatest of all time. There's even players that aren't that great. Not that he's not great, but Rondo, they're we call him playoff Rondo, but it's true. Yeah. He elevates his game, and role players do that. Robert Horry and guys like Danny Green and stuff like that. Well, maybe not last season, but in the past he has. So those role players play to the level. Giannis has to do that, and you're one of the most gifted players, one of the most gifted athletes we've ever seen play basketball. In your third contract, this is your 8th year, I think, if not 9th. I'm done with excuses. You got to go out there and get the job done.
Couldn't agree more, Hunter.
Yep. So I know that guy's a little amped up a little bit. Let's talk about the young players here. We talked about some of the best players. We talked about some of the best up-and-coming players in our rookie report here. So me and Matt, we got a couple guys we want to mention, both guys who we were high on and some guys that, maybe been a little bit disappointing. But Matt, who are some players you've been impressed with so far?
So I'm going to have a theme for this one as well. Both guys are Tyrese. So I'm going to start with Tyrese Halliburton from the Kings. This kid is awesome. He's shooting 50% from the floor, and hold on to your socks, Hunter, 47% from three. That is an absurd rate for anyone, let alone a rookie. I thought he was a steal of the draft and that he fell way too far down in the lottery. And he's just making me look good right now with the way he's playing. And then, of course, the other Tyrese is my Sixer, Tyrese Maxey. He's averaging only 10 points per game off the bench for the Sixers. And in their normal lineup, he doesn't play as much as I would like him to. But when the Sixers needed him to step up when the NBA's main mission was to destroy them, Maxey played out of his mind. He, of course, had that 39-point outburst against the Nuggets when he was basically out there with him and the Lakers' sloppy seconds of Danny Green and Dwight Howard. And he also has scored in double digits in 9 of his 18 games he has played this season. John Calipari said he was a steal of the draft, and he might be right in terms of non-lottery picks.
Hey, those sloppy seconds got more rings than the rest of your team does. I don't want to hear it. But I also had Tyrese Halliburton on my list. I'll bring up something I guess you didn't bring up. He is second in minutes per game per rookies, despite not even starting. I think that's pretty important.
28 minutes, right?
He's fourth in scoring, and he is second in assists per game amongst rookies. So that's pretty good for a guy who, again, already has two really good guards there, and Buddy Hield and De'Aaron Fox. I agree with you, Matt. 12 was way too low. He should have went way higher. And he is proving everybody wrong so far. He has been great, and I think he's got a very nice career coming his way. Also been really impressed with Tyrese Maxey, but I just didn't write him down. But I have liked him a lot. Another guy who should have went way higher in the draft, in my opinion. And I'm going to talk about another guy who should have went way higher in the draft, and that's Desmond Bane for the Memphis Grizzlies. He's probably not going to win Rookie of the Year. I don't think he'll be in the running for that, but he's just been really reliable on both sides of the floor. He's a guy who has come in and just, been a nice impact guy. He can play either guard spot, which I didn't even think he could do. I really thought he was more of just a wing, but he's shown he can play some point guard too, which is pretty impressive for them. It just seems like the Grizzlies are really able to sniff out these guys, diamonds in the rough that can make impact for their team. Yeah, Desmond Bane was another player that I thought would go way higher. It seems like we've said that about every player we've been impressed with so far. But, it just seemed like he was a guy that, even going on Twitter after the draft, it seemed like Twitter loved the Grizzlies draft. It was like, wow, if, the Grizzlies just listened to everybody on Twitter, they did their job. But Desmond Bane has been awesome. He's been a great fit for that team. He's been a great role player for them. And he's been part of the reason that they've started to turn around their season a little bit. Yeah, I think the Grizzlies are like the All-NBA Twitter team. Like, everyone loves their guys. Like, they're like the hipster team, like John Morant, Jaren Jackson, Dylan Brooks. And they've got sick uniforms too. Yeah, they do have sick uniforms. Like they're like the fans' favorite team, I guess, if you will, the Memphis Grizzlies. But rightfully so. They got some nice guys there. I'm just saying. But let's talk about some disappointments, unfortunately. I got two top 10 picks in here, Matt. I don't know about you, but who's some guys that maybe got stepped up a bit? I'm going to go with the number 1 overall pick, Anthony Edwards. He's had some highlight reel plays, that's for sure, but he's shooting just 34% from the field and 27% from three and has been a turnstile on defense. With the way LaMelo Ball is playing right now, the Wolves might be regretting that pick. And then my other guy is Aaron Nesmith, a guy I think that you liked after the Celtics drafted him, but I remember saying I didn't like the pick, and he's proven me right so far. He's shooting just 35%, averaging not even 5 points per game in less than 15 minutes per game. Maybe it's not fair to pick on him, but it seems like the Celtics have gotten little to no production from the rookies in the last 2 drafts. Yeah, Aaron Nesmith, he doesn't get a whole lot of playing time, so we'll see. He was also a freshman. No, he actually might have been a sophomore. No, he's a freshman. Like Peyton Pritchard was a senior, a little bit older. So we'll see. But yeah, Anthony Edwards hasn't been fantastic this year. Like you said, Matt, he's shown more flashes. He was a really raw player coming out of the draft. I think that's kind of the big thing here. It's why he doesn't start. They know he wasn't ready for it yet. So I think he's a bit of a project. We'll see how he goes. But I do agree, that's not an excuse for not playing well and not being an efficient player at all. 2 guys that I have on my list, actually we don't have any repeating ones. So maybe just some of these teams in the lottery just really didn't hit, at least early on. That's Obi Toppin for the New York Knicks. Now, he's been dealing with some injuries. Julius Randle obviously has played really well, and they play the same position, but only shooting 41% from the field, 28% from three, and not even 60% from the foul line. I mean, that's like not good. And he's not even averaging 5 points per game. And we were talking about this guy being a Rookie of the Year front runner potentially and being in a great situation in New York. And I hope for him he turns it around because he's a really high character guy. But I had some questions about him entering the draft, and then so far, some of those questions have definitely been answered. But I hope he turns it around. We'll see. And then Onyeka Okongwu has also been really struggling this season. I talked about I didn't love the fit with the Hawks because they had John Collins and Clint Capella, and he's only averaging around 12 minutes per game, but his numbers aren't very good either. So I think these are the 2 guys that I hope for them. They can potentially step it up and get better as the season progresses. But right now, they've been a little disappointing. Yeah, especially with Obi Toppin, I want to hit on that guy for a second. Obviously the injuries are a big thing. He had to miss some time. That probably affected getting into the group, getting into the lineup a little bit. But even watching the next game last night, he, watching him in college as opposed to now, you can't dominate the way you can in the NBA like you did in college. Like in college, he would just bully people and try to dunk on everybody. And you can't do that in the NBA. He's not that great of a shooter. As you said, just 41% from the field, 28% from three. He's not a good jump shooter. And, every time I've seen him play, it's just like he's looking to dunk. And that's really the only way he's gotten most of his points is through dunks. He's been decent defensively, but not good enough to,
even put him in the conversation of being, a guy that we've been impressed with. And then, of course, you said the other guy, oh God, I can't say his name for the life of me.
Onyeka Okongwu.
Yeah, him. He's just, I think he was kind of set up to fail there in Atlanta, going into a situation where they were pretty set with big guys. Clint Capella and him have pretty similar games. And then John Collins, too, is probably going to get the bulk of the minutes there at power forward. So, he was just put in a tough situation to begin with, and I don't really think he fits there. I think he'll probably end up being the odd guy out there and probably might even end up getting traded.
Yeah, I don't know, unless maybe they move Capella, but he's playing really well, so I can't see that happening anytime soon. And also, he has a really big contract. I don't think anyone wants that. But yeah, a lot of these top guys have not really been great so far. It's been an interesting rookie class. I don't think there's been any Zions or John Morants of that nature at all, which I think was kind of expected because I think there were a couple of guys that we knew were going to be bona fide stars basically entering the NBA. But you never know. But let's talk about our All-NBA team here. And this one was probably one of my favorite ones. Doesn't have a whole lot to do with basketball, but it's going to bring a whole lot of laughs. And that is the All-NBA Real Housewives teams. So we're going to be giving out 5 of the most dramatic players, not only current, but also all time as well. I'm going to love to hear these explanations. Matt, who made your list?
Hunter, you're going to love my explanations for these. I loved doing this team. Shout out to you for thinking of it. But I'm going to start with Daniel Tice. Daniel Tice has never committed a foul, according to Daniel Tice. I swear to all that is good and holy, no man in the NBA bothers me as much as this dude. He complains every single time he is called for a foul, which is often. I have never once seen him commit a foul and not only accept the fact that he did it, but it's like he is incapable of not saying anything to a ref after he's called for a foul. Like, he has to say something. And it's so bold of a player that stinks out loud to complain about foul calls as much as he does.
That's a funny one. I wouldn't have even thought about putting Daniel Tice.
I hate him.
Oh my God. Yeah, I can. That's really funny. Wow. You didn't even cross my mind. We definitely are going to go 5 for 5 here. Next up on my list, this was the first guy I thought of when I made this team, and this is an all-time player, and that's Dennis Rodman. This guy would just not show up for work for 2 weeks like Kyrie Irving out here and be going to Vegas with freaking Carmelo Electra and things like that and doing God only knows what. And then he would just come back. It was I think that's, I don't really watch a lot of Real Housewives, but I feel like that's the ultimate one. It's just where is this guy? What is he doing? Obviously, he's got the hair, the piercings, the tattoos, everything, the personality. He was just an absolute freak, and still kind of is. Great player, and and I guess that's the most important part is the guy who's a 3-time, or actually I think 4-time NBA champion. Maybe I forgot how many won with the Pistons, but Dennis Rodman is just an absolute nut. I had to put him on here.
Yeah, I think my all-time favorite Dennis Rodman story comes from the director of The Last Dance, who I talked to last semester, early in the semester. I went to his. He talked about a story with Dennis Rodman when he was interviewing him for The Last Dance. He said originally Dennis Rodman said, "You have 5 minutes to talk to me," and 5 minutes to talk to me. And he the director was trying to get on his good side, and he was like, "All right, do you need anything?" And he's like, "Get me a Subway sandwich from across the street." And he made his intern go get a Subway sandwich. He had the sandwich, drank his tea or whatever, and then he talked to him for an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's got to be the most hardest person to interview. And I imagine those housewives, or wherever they are, is probably not very easy, very diva-ish. So had to put Dennis Rodman on the list. But Matt, who else made it for you?
Russell Westbrook. How does a player have beef with every player he steps on the court against? I mean, seriously, this guy has had beef with everyone from opposing players to fans to Rajon Rondo's brother. I swear this man will get an open dunk, a fast break dunk, and then start yelling at the other team's bench. And the bench will look around huh? Did you say something that I didn't say anything? Why is he yelling at us? And then, he went from everyone being on his side after Katie left the Thunder to being one of the most unlikable players in the league right now. I was on his side. I loved watching Russell Westbrook play that season. He won the MVP. I understand that intensity is the biggest part of his game, and it's what gets him going. But tone it down a little bit, man. You don't need to have beef with 11-year-old Billy just because he's a fan of the opposing team.
He picks a fight with a middle schooler. That's on your own size, Russ. I should have known you were going to put Russell Westbrook on this list.
I had to. It's my brand.
Yeah, I gave you a green light basically to do that. That's on me, I guess. But he doesn't really have an off switch. That's what Russ is. He is what he is. He goes 100 miles an hour. And sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. And obviously he's had a lot of issues with like reporters and stuff too. I'm sure we've used a couple of the sound bites here in our intros. I'm sure of it. So yeah, Russell Westbrook definitely is not the guy who likes to talk to people very much, I guess, when it comes to basketball. Next up on my list is another guy who didn't want to talk to anybody. That's Kyrie Irving. I think this last couple of weeks showed it, that he's, a little bit of a diva. He comes up with these crazy theories like the Earth's flat and stuff like that. Smart guy though, of course, very intelligent. Great basketball player, but a whole lot of baggage. There were even rumors that the Nets were potentially going to cut him because they didn't want to deal with him. But as much as Kyrie Irving is one of my favorite basketball players I've ever watched play basketball, but you kind of know what you're getting yourself into with him.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that he just like leaves for 2 weeks and doesn't show up to work, that pretty much is all you need to know about him. The fact that he thought the earth was flat and just says that openly to reporters is beyond me. But I think all of that puts him in serious consideration for being a real housewife. Yeah. So I think the next player on my list is probably my favorite one, just in terms of pure comedy. He's the only all-time guy I have on my list. And that is Rasheed Wallace. Wallace is the player with the most technical fouls in NBA history. And never forget the time he was teed up and ejected from a game because he stared down an official after a timeout. If you've never watched that clip, I highly recommend it. It's quite funny. His outbursts on the court were often excessive, which caused them to be hilarious at the same time. He is the king of all players who believe they have never committed a foul. He is who Daniel Tice bows down to and says his prayers to before his head hits the pillow. According to Bleacher Report, no one in the history of the NBA ran up and down the court in the genuinely confused way Wallace did. He seemed to truly believe that he never committed a foul. Yeah, he deserves to be on this list.
Yeah, I mean, this guy started like the biggest brawl in NBA history.
Yeah.
And then, obviously you talked about the technical fouls. I believe he is first all time in that. If not, he's like at least second. I didn't have him on there, but I'm glad you brought him up. He definitely deserves to be on there. Next up, you brought up your guy that you love, just getting on. I'm going to bring up mine. That's Paul George. This guy there's always an excuse with him. It's always something. Mm-hmm. This guy. It's always like, this, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you guys shut up and play basketball. And I don't mean that in the, Lauren Ingram way. I'm not associating with that. I just mean, stop complaining and just go out there and get buckets and do your thing. Because you're a really good player. I've never denied that. From a talent perspective, you're easily one of the most talented players in the league. But just go out there and hoop, man. I'm sick and tired of hearing excuses from you. I don't want to hear it anymore. So much drama.
I would love to get like Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Al Horford on this podcast and just let them sit there and see what we have to say to them. But I agree with Paul George. I think I definitely agree with your take there on Paul George. You called him Pandemic P or whatever. The way he just couldn't handle the bubble last year, and he was like the only one who had an issue with it. Pretty dramatic, pretty housewives of him. So I'll definitely agree with that one.
Yeah. All right. Who else made it for you, Matt?
This is another player that fits in the Daniel Tice, Rasheed Wallace, array. There is Draymond Green. Remember when he kicked Steven Adams in the no-touch zone, or when he got a tech in an NBA Finals game and was forced to sit out the next game because he literally had too many technicals? Yeah, he deserves to be on this list. He's another guy that complains about seemingly every foul called against him. But the main reason for him being on this list is because he just cannot seem to control his emotions at all, whether it be good or bad. You'd think he would begin to learn with all the texts he's been given, but he just doesn't.
Yeah, Draymond Green, kind of like Russell Westbrook, like you put him on there. Very, very energetic and outspoken and not afraid to curse anybody out. Obviously, you kind of love that intensity and stuff like that too. But sometimes it can, it is what it is. With the good comes the bad. That's kind of been Draymond Green, I guess, if you will. So obviously, a very good player. But yeah, definitely is very dramatic and very outspoken. But a guy who I have on my list, it's a shame I have him on here because, one of the greatest Lakers of all time, but that's got to be Big Diesel and Shaq. Not really much of him as a player. It's really more post-career. We've seen him like really just go at guys. I mean, did you see that Donovan Mitchell interview?
Oh
really
my God.
Like, you're good, but not great. I'm like, what? Like,
yeah.
And I'm like, Jack. And then also we talk about housewives. He loves the attention. He loves the paparazzi. We see him do all those, general commercials and oh God, what's the other one he does a lot with the moisturizer, hot and cold. That's not it.
Icy hot.
Icy hot. Yeah, he loves that. Big into commercials, loves the spotlight, loved being in Hollywood. But also he's just like just like saying all this stuff about players and just starting beefs. Like, just always got on guys like Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee. Now it looks like Donovan Mitchell. I'm like, dog, like, come on, man. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand where you're coming from. You are one of the greatest players of all time. I guess you do. If you do have the black card to say whatever you want, I guess you are that, Shaq. But, like, I mean, take it easy on these guys. I mean, not everyone's, one of the most dominant players of all time. Like,
yeah, and it just seems to he just seems to think that he is better than everybody too. Like, he just constantly talks crap about these players, and they just have never said anything to him. Like, they probably looked up to him in a lot of ways, and he just goes down on everybody's like, what? Like, I didn't say anything to you. He goes at Embiid constantly for no reason. And the Rudy Gobert thing, I get it. $200 million is a lot for Rudy Gobert, but he didn't have to expose him like that and go all in on him. Yeah, just literally just stirring the pot like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Donovan Mitchell, that was just really uncalled for. Live interview too.
Live.
After post game, Donovan Mitchell's exhausted, just won a game, and you're talking all this crap about him, and he's just okay, what do you want me to say about this? How do you want me to respond to that? He literally just said okay and moved on.
Yeah, big stir in the pot, big instigator.
Yeah.
I guess it's great for Twitter, but it's a little uncalled for. That is probably a definition of a housewife. But last but not least, Matt, who made the list?
Possibly the greatest player of all time, LeBron James. LeBron acts like every time he drives to the hoop, he gets fouled. A lot of the times he does, I'll give him that, but there's still plenty of times where he doesn't. And he has his patented palms up Jesus and crying face to the ref. There's also at least one point in every game where you think LeBron has suffered a career-ending injury, but all he did was get poked in the eye.
That's fair. I can't really not defend him on this list. I think that's fair. Sure, I always say him and Anthony Davis, they have a career-ending injury every time they play, and they just get back up and they're okay. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
LeBron, he can be a little dramatic, I'll admit. But at the end of the day, he's got a couple of these on his fingers, so I can't complain.
Yep.
Last but not least on my list is gonna really shock you, but there's definitely a sole reason why, and that's Wilt Chamberlain, R.I.P. to him.
Wow.
Very he likes fornication. I'll just say that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, really big into that. Lived the lifestyle, the life. I don't think he was the most dramatic player or anything like that, but very, very Hollywood on him. Let's just say that. We like to get around. Got busy both on and off the court. So I couldn't help but put him on this list, Matt.
We might have to cut this part out.
Hey, you know what? I had to put him on. What can I say? That rounds out my list here.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely not wrong. I think I've seen the number somewhere on Reddit or Twitter somewhere, where it was just an absurd number of women that he has had relations with. Shout out, bro. You're living the dream, but I don't know.
That's a great way to end this podcast, Matt. It's been a great way. I'm glad we got to this topic. Sometimes, we do a little more serious ones, but I wanted to keep it a little lighthearted because why not? Shout out Matt, wearing the Allen Iverson threads. You show them to him one time.
Hey, go Sixers, baby. They're winning tonight by 20.
Okay. Slow your horses there. But that's going to wrap it up here on Ball Don't Lie. We'll bring it to you next week as well here at Innovation Park. Still going to be over Zoom. So thank you for watching. We'll catch you next week.
Trust the process, baby.
Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.